What can you do to make your marriage thrive? Sometimes it's about what you don't do that can make the biggest difference. I'm your host, Rob Philo, and today I'm talking with Scott Kedersha, the marriage and family pastor at Harris Creek Baptist Church in Waco, Texas. Scott is passionate about equipping premarital and married couples through resources with his over 2 decades of work in marriage ministry. He joins us today to talk about 6 common characteristics of couples who struggle and explores the why behind these challenges. If you love practical and approachable advice on how to strengthen your marriage this week, you're really going to enjoy this episode. Let's begin. So Scott, thank you so much for joining us today on the WinShape Marriage Podcast. Could you fill our listeners in a little bit on your background and what brings you here today?
Yeah, such a joy to join you. Thanks for having me. So my name's Scott. I'm married to Kristen. We've been married, we'll be 23 years in the fall of 24. We got married actually 4 days after 9/11, which was crazy. That was a Tuesday. We got married that Saturday, so it'll be 23 in a couple in the fall of 24. And 4 young men that we're raising. We've got twins who are 20, a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old. And I've been doing marriage ministry for a long time in the church now, since 2006, full time, and love what I get to do.
Yeah, 4 young boys in that age range. Sounds like your household is full of fun right now.
It's awesome. It is. It's very loud, obnoxious, smelly, rude. I mean, I can't believe these boys are. My poor wife deals with it really, really well, and has for all 20 years. She's an amazing boy mom, and it's a joy and a privilege just to make young men, help raise young men. That's for sure.
Yes, for sure. And I'm sure it helps you develop a lot of patience as well. Could you talk a little bit about, you mentioned you've been in marriage ministry for a while now.
Right.
What kind of got you into the marriage ministry space?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I went to Dallas Seminary and I graduated in 2006, and I was looking for jobs all over the country. And the job that made the most sense was working at a church in Dallas, Texas called Watermark Community Church. That's actually where we attended. I was part-time working there for a few years. And the job that they offered was half community, half marriage pastor. And I wanted to do community. I didn't really know what a marriage pastor was, but I had 2 young kids and a third on the way. And I needed to provide for my family. So I took the job really in the back of my mind going, I don't want to be a marriage pastor. Nobody ever in the history of the world has grown up wanting to be a marriage pastor. I don't want to do that. And so kind of reluctantly took it because I knew I had to provide, and very quickly just fell in love with what I got to do. Got to work with young couples, got to do a lot with my wife. I think I was only married 5 years at the time when I took a job as a marriage pastor. So I learned alongside everyone else I was leading. It was in some ways the blind leading the blind, and just really worked hard to learn more about marriage and learn from those who were further along than me. And I think the thing I love the most about it, Rob, is like I never ever woke up, and still to this day, I never wake up and go, does what I do count? Does it matter? Does it have an impact? Is it significant? That has never ever waned for me, that the privilege I get to help couples in marriage. And so fell into it by accident, and then really fell in love with it very quickly. And there's really nothing else I want to do. I've had other opportunities, but I just want to help marriages in every season of life.
Yeah, that's super inspiring. And I can imagine as someone being married for all of 5 years, stepping into marriage ministry, saying, hey, I'm leading this now. It can feel like a fun challenge, but an awesome opportunity to grow and develop in your own marriage while you're ministering to other marriages. Now,
for sure,
Scott, I've been keeping up with some of your writing that you've done over on your blog, and you recently wrote a blog titled 6 Common Characteristics of Couples Who Struggle. Could you talk a little bit about kind of what inspired you to write that piece?
Yeah, it's a funny story. I mean, I was my friends at Watermark had actually come up with a list of 4 common characteristics of couples who do well. And so I've, have thought through that many times. I've taught it, have kind of taken some of their content and used it with their permission. And then I was at a retreat. I was doing a retreat for singles, and a young lady came up to me and just asked the question. She said, I'm in a relationship now. And I'm afraid of making mistakes that I've seen so many other people make or that I have made in my own relationship. And she said, I'm sure you've walked with a lot of couples. What are the common characteristics of couples who don't make it? And so, I gave her a few things and then just walked away from that conversation. Said, I actually want to sit down and think through that because I think that could be really helpful. For me personally, it could be helpful for other couples. Like, what are the things that, we can come up with a list of things that couples do well, thriving couples do, and then what are the things that couples who struggle, what are common characteristics? And I think we can learn from that. I can learn from that. And so that's what led me to put it together, is just as a way to really answer her question and then think through ways that I wanted to help other couples.
Yeah. And it almost makes it simpler for couples because you can say, okay, here are the things that couples that don't make it do. Maybe we should avoid those. Here are some things that couples that have really happy and thriving marriages do. We need to lean into some of those things. But
for sure. And people want those handles. Like if we can give them something biblical, practical, that's kind of time tested, they'll latch onto that. And people don't want to mess up in marriage. They want to do this thing well. They don't want to be like mom and dad. They don't want to be another statistic of a failed marriage or a miserable marriage. And so I really think this is an area where we kind of have people hungry to learn from others who have gone before them. And so it becomes one of those things that, like, if I can learn something practical, biblical, I want to do it. And that's what I want to do, is I just want to be helpful, but I want to be practical and help couples, point them towards Jesus and then give them ways that they can proactively work on their marriage.
Yeah, for sure. And I say all the time, nobody in school teaches you how to do marriage. And so it's one of those things that we all kind of stumble into and are looking like, okay, how can I do this well? And I think it's helpful to have those tangible tips.
Absolutely.
If you don't mind, I'd love to go through your list of 6 common characteristics and get your thoughts on each one of these and what couples should know.
Let's go.
Yeah, starting with your first one here, you said neither spouse is pursuing Jesus as a common characteristic of a couple who struggles.
Yeah, that's of course going to be the answer that we're going to give. And it's not just the number one answer on the board because it's what you expect. It's because it's real and it's true. I think about John 15:5, that if we don't abide, if we don't remain, if we don't stay connected to Jesus, that, apart from him, we could do nothing. And, and things, we may be able to do a few things for a short period of time, but if it's going to be lasting, significant, if it's really going to have an impact on me, if it's really going to have an impact on my spouse, on our marriage, on our kids, on the way we live, then we just truly need to believe that apart from Christ, we could do nothing. And so that's the foundation, is that if any couple is going to do well, there's going to be the strong, intimate relationship with Jesus Christ. The other thing I think about is, and we actually just taught this passage in church on Sunday, is, at the end of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 7:24-27, parallel passages, Luke chapter 6, 47-49, Jesus says that at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, that you have two options. You either take what I've taught you and you apply it and you build your life on it, on the solid rock foundation of Jesus, or you build your life and your marriage on sand. And the one guarantee, we know storms are going to come. The one who builds on rock, the one who builds on sand, the storm comes no matter what. But if you build your house on rock, the solid foundation, that the house is going to stand. And so this is like 101. The most important thing any couple can do is to build their life on the foundation of Jesus Christ, and their spouse to do the same thing. And that, really apart from Christ, what we have in our marriage is not going to last.
Yeah. And I couldn't agree more. It's this idea that Jesus is the perfect model of how to love your spouse well. And so the more that you grow in your relationship with God, the more that you become like him and can model his actions, the more it's only natural that you'll learn to love your spouse better as well. So Scott, as I was kind of reading through this first point, you say neither spouse is pursuing Jesus. And it got me thinking, this idea that both spouses should be pursuing Jesus. Could you talk a little bit about maybe a listener that's hearing this and saying, okay, I'm pursuing Jesus, I'm doing everything I can, but my spouse maybe isn't in the same place. Kind of what advice or wisdom would you share with that person?
And that's such a good question, Rob. And it's so real, just working in marriage ministry for a long time, I've seen that so many times. And so first, I think about the couple before they get married at 2 Corinthians 6:14, that a believer should not be yoked to a non-believer. And so I think that's the only, or one of the only places in the Bible where it's abundantly clear on who we should not marry, is that if you're a believer, you don't marry a non-believer, because our walk with Jesus affects everything in our lives, right? It affects the way we communicate, spend money, raise our kids, do our jobs, spend our leisure time. Everything we do comes about out of our relationship with Jesus. And so if you have that and your significant other who you're going to marry does not, it's the opportunity to flee, to run away from that relationship. So I think there's a lot of wisdom there before you get married. I know some listeners are probably not married yet, or people who are in an unequally yoked relationship. And so encouraging them to break up if it's a believer and a non-believer. And then once you're married, if there's a couple of different scenarios that fit along with what you said. It could be that one of you trusts in Christ after you married as two non-believers, and then somebody trusts in Christ and the other spouse doesn't. It could be that you're both followers of Christ, but one is running hard after the Lord, the other one isn't. And so in those circumstances, if you're married, I think the Lord would have you fight for your marriage and to do whatever you can to be a Christ-like witness to your spouse, that you would pursue Jesus, you would live out what his word says. You continue to build your house on the solid rock foundation of Jesus Christ. And then you just pray and you serve your spouse as best you can, that you are a Christ-like example to them. You do not, I think about Galatians 6:9, do not grow weary of doing good. That there are going to be times when it's going to be really tough and frustrating, and don't grow weary. Just keep leaning in, keep loving Jesus, keep loving your spouse, your family. And then you never give up praying for your spouse that they would come to know the Lord. So where community becomes really significant, that if you are really alone in your marriage, of having some good support around you through the body of Christ, through other like-minded believers who can support you, because that's a tough existence. And I know, many marriages where that's the case over the years, where one is really faithfully pursuing Jesus and the other one isn't. And that's tough. And so do not grow weary, keep praying, and then make sure you get some good support. What would you say? Anything else you'd add to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I'd say you have to understand your role when it comes to your relationship with your spouse. This idea that you're going to fix them on your own is a weight that you're not meant to bear. And so I think the idea of praying, inviting God into it, and then also cluing in community and saying hey, can you come alongside us in this season, helps shift some of that pressure that you're experiencing and take it and distributing it in places to where it doesn't feel so burdensome on you, if that makes sense.
Really good. Yeah, it's really good.
Now moving on to your second point here, you said they don't know how to communicate or manage conflict. Now, this one might feel a little bit obvious, but talk a little bit about what you mean here.
Yeah. So you said this before, Rob, nobody, very few people have anyone else in their life who helps prepare them well for marriage. Unless you do intentional premarital counseling, unless you've got a mentor couple, unless you grew up in a home where mom and dad both love Jesus, married well and pour into you, we don't know how to do this well. And I'd say that's probably even more so for communication and conflict. We always take classes on how to give better speeches and how to debate and how to argue, but who teaches us how to listen? I think about Proverbs 18:2. It says, a fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing their opinion. Or, James 1:19, dear brothers and sisters, let us be slow to speak, quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. I want to do the opposite of that. I want to be quick to speak, slow to listen, and then really quick to become angry. I'm so often the fool in Proverbs 18:2 who I don't delight in hearing what somebody else says. I just want to share what I believe. And so we don't know how to listen. We just want to win. We just want to be right. And even if our intentions are not malicious like that, it's so deeply ingrained in us to be poor communicators, to be selfish, that we don't know how to do this well. And so candidly, I don't know how, how can a couple make it unless they're able to communicate and manage conflict? We've got to talk about everything, decisions with money and kids and jobs and homes. It feels like marriage is often one and it's so much better than this, but sometimes it feels like it's one never-ending conversation where we make decisions. And if you can't communicate, if you can't listen, if you can't manage conflict, I'm not sure how anyone can make it as a couple. So couples who thrive, learn how to communicate, learn how to listen. Couples who struggle never do, and you'll just end up frustrated for a really, really, really long time.
Yeah, and you make a really great point. At so many of our retreats, I mean, we have retreats for couples in just about every stage or season of life, and we talk on a whole range of topics. And one of the retreats that I've been to most frequently, just as a staff member attending, has been our marriage prep retreat, where we try to prepare couples stepping into marriage. You kind of talked about premarital counseling, and so it's funny because every single thing that we touch on, whether it be finances or preparing for a family or preparing for in-law relationships or whatever it may be, so much of that foundation comes back to this idea of having healthy and thriving communication. And if you can get that right, it feels like you can solve so many other problems for your marriage.
It's so true, Rob. I mean, I don't know how you get to the other end of those conversations, decisions without communicating. And so it's hard. Be patient, show grace to one another, and then talk about what a great area to invest in our marriages. Like, one of the things I always say is you always want to be a constant learner in our marriages, that, we're learning more about ourselves, about our spouse, about marriage, about the Lord. But one area where I think we can all, regularly invest is learning how to be a better communicator in marriage. That because it doesn't come naturally, we've got to do something that's going to help us. And so read books, go into classes, listen to podcasts, go into a weekend seminar, conference, whatever it is, so that you can learn how to do something we're not naturally inclined to do on our own.
Yeah, for sure. Now, Scott, your next point here is one that you touched on a little bit earlier in our conversation, but it's this idea that couples who struggle tend to find themselves isolated and absent from strong community.
This has been, we moved to Waco 4 years ago. I came on staff at Harris Creek 4 years ago after 14 years in Dallas at Watermark. And my first observation here that has held true in my 4 years working at this church is about 85 to 90% of the couples who reach out to me have no community. This is couples who, they're not asking simple questions, but couples who are struggling, 85 to 90% of them have no community around them, no good, strong Christian influence. They haven't been plugged into to a church. They might be believers, but have been trying to do this on their own. And so there's just this common theme and trend that if you isolate, chances are really good you're going to struggle. And that's a biblical fact, right? Genesis 2:18. We see it is not good for man, not good for woman to be alone. So that's even from the beginning, from creation. God has designed us with this need for companionship. And that comes in part through a spouse, but it also comes in the form of community. And so couples who struggle just don't have those good friends around them. They don't have friends who are spurring them on, challenging them, encouraging them. Man, I think about Hebrews 3:13. But encourage one another day by day, as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. And just this idea that we need others to encourage us. We need others, Proverbs 27:17, to sharpen us. We need Proverbs 27:6. We need friends who aren't afraid to wound us. And then we not only need friends, we need wise friends. I think about Proverbs 13:20. Whoever walks with the wise grows wise, but a companion of fools will suffer harm. And so just this idea that not only do we need community, not only do we need others, but we need wise people who are going to help sharpen us. And over, I've seen couples who have no community often will be the ones who struggle.
Yeah.
And then one other thought is, just because you're in community doesn't make you immune to troubles and struggles. They're going to come for everyone, that's guaranteed. But when you've got a net of other people around you who can care for you, challenge you, help hold your arms up when you're weary, encourage you when you're tired, that makes such a huge difference. And again, it won't prevent the problems, but just giving you a network and a community who can support you when the trials come.
Yeah. And I think when you find yourself in an isolated position, You might come to circumstances that feel like the end of the world or like the biggest challenge ever. And then you have a conversation with someone in a similar season or a little bit ahead of you, and they say, "Oh yeah, we've done that. That's not normal, or that's not abnormal.
Right.
Like we've
Right.
walked through that. Like that's something that couples go through." And so you get to this place where you're like, "Man, I feel stuck." Having that guidance and having that community can really make a huge difference.
So good. I think about like newlyweds who, when they get married, they think they're the first couple ever who has ever had this issue. And when you're in community, you realize, hey, that it's everyone. It might not look exactly the same, but you're not unique. You're not the first. You won't be the last. And so community helps us normalize some of the challenges that we're walking through and helps us realize, okay, not only am I not the only one, but everyone else is walking through it and they've made it. I can make it too.
Yeah, this idea that, we have to be the only people going through this. And the reality is like just about everyone has just about the same similar set of circumstances or problems that they're going through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I think your next point here is super interesting. You talk about being bored and how that can impact your marriage. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I've seen this one play out in my marriage so significantly, and I've seen it in all of my friends as well. When before we get married, we're super creative, we're fun, we have more time. We're like trying to impress each other, and so we do things that are out of the box, creative. We date, we pursue, we're romantic. Newlyweds, we start doing the same thing, and then you get further down the road, kids come along, life gets busier, and you just fall into ruts and you no longer pursue your spouse. You no longer romance them. You no longer go on dates and you just get bored. And it's just like day in, day out routine of kids and bills and jobs. And you no longer have this excitement or spark in your marriage. And, Ecclesiastes 9:9 says, "Enjoy life with the wife whom you love. All the days he's given you on this earth, enjoy life with one another." And we just stop enjoying it. And I remember early on when I started doing marriage ministry, I read a book by a guy named Dave Carter. And in the book, he talked about common characteristics of couples who walk through infidelity. And one of the most common things, whether you're a newlywed who has an affair or somebody who's been married 50 years who has an affair, one of the common characteristics is just that they're bored. And so when we're bored in marriage, and this never makes it right, but it just often happens, when you're bored, you look for fun with someone else who's not your spouse. And so couples who struggle are bored and they're too busy with everything else except their spouse. They neglect their marriage. They fall into patterns. They become just roommates with one another instead of a healthy, active, vibrant marriage. And so what would it look like to invest in your marriage continually, to have fun, to date each other, to continue to strive to be romantic and pursue one another so that your marriage and your lives are not marked by boredom?
Yeah. And this one's tricky a little bit because we all have our routines and rhythms that we love to fall into. And life just feels a little bit simpler when you go through each day doing the same thing over and over and over again. But then you find yourself, like you said, in this pattern of, man, I feel bored lately. I could crave some novel experiences. And so for a couple that's in that rut, what are some tips? What are some ideas that they can do to break out of that like rut of doing the same thing over and over again and try something new?
Yeah, that's great. One other thing that leads to it is we look at social media and we think everyone else is having fun except for us.
Yeah, that's true.
And so it's easy to fall into the trap of comparison as well. And so I think this plays out, like I never want to prescribe, here's what you have to do. You have to go on a weekly date night. You have to spend a certain amount of money in your marriage. What I encourage couples to do is you've got to figure out what's fun for you. And so if fun for you is going to a coffee shop with your spouse, one night a week, or if it's going to Chick-fil-A with your spouse, if it's going to the grocery store with your spouse, if it's running errands, if it's doing gardening with one another, if it's running together, if it is a date night, if it's vacationing, you figure out what's fun for you. And the reason I would never prescribe what you have to do is because we're all in different places financially. We're all in different places with support, with if you got kids, we're all in different places with what's fun for us. And like I remember some friends who fun for them was building a fort in their house as adults, getting out of the fort and watching a movie together and eating popcorn. I go, I would never do that in a million years. Like, that's just not fun to me,
Uh,
but it's fun to other couples.
for
And so
sure.
you
Yeah.
figure out what's fun for you and you do it. And so that like takes a little bit of work, but you try different things and you feel like we love college football. And so for me and Kristen, and a lot of people do, that doesn't make us unique, but that's one of the most fun things we could do together. We just watched, we just had the Olympics at the time of the recording. Summer Olympics were on. Every night for 2 weeks, we cleared our calendar. We watched the Olympics together, sat on the couch together. It was perfect. And it wasn't like we were having these deep romantic conversations, but we were having fun with one another. And I look like, honestly, I look forward to it like all day. I can't wait till I can get home from work. And sometimes our kids were with us, sometimes not. And I'm like, the last few days after the Olympics, there's a little bit of like, we're both grieved of, what can we do? So last night we watched replays of some Olympic events that we never watched, even though the Olympics are over now.
Oh, I love that.
Because we just want to enjoy some of that again together as a couple.
Oh, I love the idea of
Yeah.
the Olympics being over and you're thinking, okay, how can we get more Olympics? Oh, that's wonderful. And good to know. I'll count you in the category of not interested in the fort building. That's good to know, Scott. But I think that's so true of finding something that you enjoy doing together and leaning into that as much as possible. I think that's great wisdom. One of the things you mentioned here is this idea that couples who struggle commonly blame their spouse. Talk a little bit about that.
Woof. Yeah, this is a tough one, right? Because it's so easy to see what our spouse has done wrong and not ourselves. And there's just like a clear delineation that I've seen over the years of couples who do well are able to see their own part in the conflict. It doesn't mean they're 100% responsible. In fact, I think that's harmful when you always take the blame and assume your spouse doesn't have a part. Most of the time, we both have a part to play. But couples who do well will, a phrase my friend John McGee says, John at Watermark says, draw the circle around yourself and work on everyone inside the circle. That I'm going to start first with me. And really that's just a biblical concept. It's Matthew 7, 3-5, where Jesus says, quit focusing on the speck, the piece of sawdust in the other person's eye. And instead you deal with the baseball bat, the redwood tree, the log, the plank that's coming out of your own eye. And what I love about that is the way that Jesus says it is that we just can't see clearly when we've got something obstructing our vision. And so you get the plank out, you deal with yourself first. Even if I'm 1% responsible and my spouse is 99%, which is not ever the case, but even if that's the case, I'm going to take the log out of my eye first so that I can see clearly. And then he doesn't say you walk away. Like if they've got a speck in your eye, he says you go help them remove it. And when we remove a speck, it requires, remove a speck in somebody else. It requires, gentleness and understanding. We've got to be really careful. And so if we've got a log coming out, there's no way that we could be understanding, careful, empathetic, and gentle. In fact, we're going to be harmful. And so couples who do well will deal with their own stuff before they focus completely on their spouse's issues in the marriage.
Yeah, it's always amazing to me the extinguishing power that humility has when it comes to conflict. And the way that you can take some time and say, okay, let me think about what I contributed to this. And the trust that builds with your spouse too. And you find yourselves in these tough situations, this idea of like, okay, I understand that we're at a pass right now. I'm willing to like look inside. Let's dive into that and figure out how I can do better. And once you do that, it only opens the door and extends the invitation for your spouse to go in and say, okay, I respect that. Thank you for doing that. Now let's work through this together. I think it's
really good.
It's great wisdom for sure.
Yeah, I've heard somebody say, I don't remember who it was, is that like the idea that you go in your closet every day and one piece of clothing you put on every day is you put on humility. And it just looks good on everyone when we're humble. And when we're humble, we can, exactly as you said, we can see more clearly. We're more patient. We're dealing with ourselves first. And so probably honestly, like you're making me think, I just wrote it down, Rob, that if there's a seventh thing on the list, and there's certainly more than these six that we're going to talk through, but just a posture of humility versus a posture of pride is a game changer when it comes to couples who thrive and couples who struggle.
Yes, for sure. No, I think that's a great word. Now, you mentioned 6 common characteristics here. We're up on number 6 here. Your 6th point, you say they're not committed and they look for a way out. I think that's an interesting point. Could you talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, so we see in Genesis chapter 2 is when the Lord talks about marriage. He says, a man leaves his father and mother, becomes united to his wife. The two become one flesh. And in Matthew 19, Jesus quotes that passage. And he adds in Matthew 19:6, he says, what God has joined together, let no man separate. And so the marriage union is intended to be a lifelong, permanent, committed relationship between one man and one woman. And the pattern of the world pushes against that in every way. It says you want to be happy. If you're not happy, you get out. When things are tough, you can get out. Marriage isn't intended really to be permanent, or you don't need to be committed. And so it leads us to a posture of like, when things get tough, or if I don't like where we are, I'm going to hit the eject button and I'm going to look for another marriage. I'm just going to get out of this one. And God had never intended marriage to be that way. In the same way that he is patiently and with his steadfast loving kindness, he is committed to us, not because of anything we've done, but because of his love. He intends marriage to be the same way between a husband and a wife, that we would be steadfast and committed to one another. And so couples who struggle are looking for ways out, whether it's with another person, whether it's pornography, some addiction, some hobby. They're consistently looking for ways to angle out of the marriage and the relationship. I think about when a Navy SEAL goes through SEAL training, they go through their, the week at the end. I forget, like the end of their training. It's supposed to be the hardest. I think they call it Hell Week is what they call it.
Yeah.
And they look for the way out. And so they put this bell on the shore that if in your last week of training, if at any point you want out, you run up, you ring that bell, and you no longer need to do the physically demanding, grueling, horrific things that they have to do to become a Navy SEAL.
Yeah.
And they say that the SEALs who know that the bell is over there are the ones who are going to go over and ring the bell. The ones who make it through don't even acknowledge that the bell exists. And so the reason I'd say all that is couples who thrive in marriage don't even give the way out a thought. Like, they don't consider it an option. They don't threaten divorce. They don't joke about it. They're like, we're committed and we're going to do whatever we can to make it in this marriage.
Yeah, for sure.
And so that's what I encourage couples is to have that posture of, we're committed, we're going to do whatever we can to work this thing out and not look for ways out.
Yeah. And I've shared this on another podcast episode we did, but nobody's perfect. Like, there's no perfect person. And so this idea that you're going to step out of your marriage and find something better is just not reality. I mean, what we're all looking for is just another co-builder to work and build a life together. And so we don't need to be perfect. We don't need to look for a perfect person. We just need to be malleable and willing to work together to get to that point. And I totally agree with you. This idea that if you go into it with this mindset of like, there's no back door, there's no hidden exit, we're in this. And I think that shapes your mindset a little bit. And I think it even speaks to the level of confidence that both you and your spouse have in your relationship as a whole, when you know that this isn't something that you can't trust. Like, this is something that you can believe in and work towards and build together. And I think it makes it just so much more encouraging for couples.
It's really good, Rob. Yeah, I love that idea that if you expect, this is where premarital prep comes in, as well as, is helping to deal with those expectations that your spouse is going to let you down, you're going to let your spouse down. And when that happens, that's so normative. It's 1 Corinthians 7:28 that if you marry, you will have trouble. The only promise about marriage in the entire Bible, right? If you marry, you will have trouble. And so I'm not going to look for a way out when my spouse disappoints me or when I let my spouse down. That's just marriage. And it's part of what God does in sharpening us and drawing us closer to himself and to our spouses, working through those challenges that are inevitable for every single couple out there.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Now, Scott, before I let you go here, for the couple that's listening, that's looking for just one nugget of information to hold on to or one tangible thing to walk away with, what would you say to them after hearing this conversation?
Man, that's good. That's like choosing my favorite child. This probably will sound, again, cliche, and of course is the answer I'm going to give. But I just believe this more and more, that nothing is going to grow your marriage and your affection for your spouse more than a deep relationship with Jesus Christ. And so, yes, go learn how to communicate, go be humble, go get community, go on a date, draw the circle around yourself and work on yourself, all the things that we talk through. But if I've got like one thing I could tell you, it's do everything you can in your life to become more like Jesus Christ. Follow him in everything he says. That the Bible doesn't even give us a lot of counsel on marriage, to be honest. Like there aren't a lot of marriage passages, but the entire Bible, I mean, this whole book is about who he is and his character. And so if you want to have a great marriage, don't study the Bible to have a great marriage. You study the Bible, you pray, you spend time with the Lord, you go to church so that you can learn more about him, so that you can become more and more like him. And if a husband does that and a wife does that, that's all you need for a great marriage, is a husband and wife who both love the Lord. That thing's going to thrive, and it's not just going to thrive, you're going to love it as well. It's going to be a source of life and joy for you, not just something that you tolerate or just make it through. It's where you're different than the rest of the world when a husband and wife are both like Jesus.
Yeah. I love that, connecting the dots back to the beginning and leaning into the transformative power that Jesus can have on your relationship. Right. Well, Scott, I've really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate you. Grateful for what you guys are doing.
Of course. And to those listening, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the WinShape Marriage Podcast. We'll catch you back here next week.
Hey there. If you're enjoying this conversation, make sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more marriage resources. And let us know what you think of this episode in the comments below.